Hare Krishna. So we're going to be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form, text number 1. So we completed the chapter 5 yesterday, and we are now moving into chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form. Rishi Uvacha, Iti tasam swashaktinam satinam asametya saha prashukta tantranam Nishamya gatim Ishvaraha Rishirvacha iti tashang swasaktinam satinam asametya saha prashuktaloka tantranam Nishamya gatim Ishvaraha. Priya Mataji, Pratibha Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Rishihi Uvacha. The Rishi Maitreya said, Iti, thus, Tasam, the Swashaktinam, own potential. So situated, Asametya, without combination, Saha, he, the Lord, Prasupta, suspended, Lokatantranam, in the universal creations, Nishamya, hearing, Gating, progress, Ishvaraha, the Lord. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Translation and purports by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The Rishi Maitreya said, the Lord thus heard about the suspension of the progressive creative functions of the universe due to the non-combination of his potencies, such as the Mahatattva. Purport. There is nothing wanting in the creation of the Lord. All the potencies are there in a dormant state, but unless they are combined by the will of the Lord, nothing can progress. The suspended progressive work of creation can only be revived by the direction of the Lord. So here, in this, Maitreya Rishi is mentioning about the creative functions, and this chapter is about the universal form, as to how the universal form comes into existence. And now the ingredients of creation are already there, which is called as the Mahatattva, which is represented by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the Mahavishnu feature. Now all the ingredients are there. Just because the ingredients are there, sometime back we were giving the example, all the ingredients are there in the refrigerator. But just going in the morning to the kitchen does not make breakfast, or going in the afternoon to the kitchen does not make lunch. Somebody has to do it, right? Put them together. Somebody has to make the creative function. And the Lord is the one who makes all of that happen through his direction. Right? He just gives the direction, but putting together is also done by various of his potencies like Brahma, Shiva, Durga, and so on and so forth. And how it is done is what is going to be explained in this chapter. Text number 2. Kala Sanyam Tada Devim Vibrak Shaktim Urukramaha Trayo Vingshati Tatvanam Ganam Yugapat Avishat.
Hare Krishna. Kala Shanyam, known as Kali, Tada, at that time, Devim, the goddess, Vibrat, destructive, Shaktim, potency, Urukramaha, the supreme powerful, Trayaha Vimshati, 23, Tatvanam, of the elements, Ganam, all of them, Yugapat, simultaneously, Avishat, entered. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. The Supreme Powerful Lord then simultaneously entered into the 23 elements with the goddess Kali, his external energy, who alone amalgamates all the different elements. The ingredients of matter are counted as 23. The total material energy, false ego, sound, touch, form, taste, smell, earth, water, fire, air, sky, eye, ear, nose, tongue, skin, hand, leg, evacuating organ, genital, speech, and mind. All are combined together by the influence of time and are again dissolved in the course of time. Time, therefore, is the energy of the Lord and acts in her own way by the direction of the Lord. This energy is called Kali and is represented by the dark, destructive goddess generally worshipped by persons influenced by the mode of darkness or ignorance in material existence. In the Vedic hymn, this process is described as Mula Prakritir Avikritir Mahadhadhyaha prakriti vikritayah sapta sodashakastu vikaro na prakritir na vikritihi purusha. The energy which acts as material nature in a combination of 23 ingredients is not the final source of creation. The Lord enters into the elements and applies his energy called Kali. In all other Vedic scriptures, the same principle is accepted. In the Brahma Samhita, it is stated, Ekopyashau rachayitum jagadanda koti yachaktirasti jagadanda chayaya dantaha andhantarasta paramanu chayantarastam govindam adipurusham tamaham bhaja. I worship the primeval Lord Govinda, who is the original personality of Godhead, by his partial plenary expansion, Mahavishnu. He enters into material nature and then into each and every universe as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, and then as Shirodakashaya Vishnu, into all the elements, including every atom of matter. Such manifestations of cosmic creation are innumerable, both in the universes and in the individual atoms. Similarly, this is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. Atava bahunaitena kim gyatena tava arjuna vistabhyaham idam kritsnam ekam sena sthito jagat. O Arjuna, there is no necessity of your knowing about my innumerable energies which act in various ways. I enter into the material creation by my partial plenary expansion, Paramatma or the Super Soul, in all the universes and in all the elements thereof, and thus the work of creation goes on. The wonderful activities of material nature are due to Lord Krishna, and thus he is the final cause or the ultimate cause of all causes. So, we see that when the creation happens, there is the Mahat Tattva, which is represented by the personality of Godhead, who is Mahavishnu. And by his glance, all this thing is created. And we also saw, we need to see that in different perspectives. One is when Mahavishnu is there sitting along with Lakshmi Devi. From Lakshmi Devi, we see that there is the expansion of Rama Devi, and from Rama Devi expands Durga. And then from Mahavishnu expands Shambhu. And by the combination of Ma Durga and Shiva is how the creation happens in this material world. And then there is also the mention of Kali here, who's also a representation of Kala, time, here he says. So the Lord enters himself into all the 23 elements. So which means, even though there are all of these expansions and all of these elements that are there, ultimately, if the Lord does not enter each one of them, none of them come into function. That is the fundamental that we have to understand. Right? And that is represented by the verse that Srila Prabhupada quotes from Brahma Samhita. He says, Andhantarasta paramanu chayantarasta. Not only that he enters into the andas, which is the Brahmandas, where he enters as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu. So, considering the material cosmic manifestation, the source of cosmic manifestation is Mahavishnu. So, he is being considered as the source. Of course, we understand that Mahavishnu's source is Krishna ultimately, who expands into Brahma and then the Chaturvyuha and then the second Chaturvyuha and then Mahavishnu comes. So, that is in the spiritual world. But in the material world, the main Purusha is the Karanodakashaya Vishnu. How does he expand into the material world and creates and maintains everything? He expands into the Anda, which means he expands as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu. And then he expands as Shirodakashaya Vishnu. And who is Shirodakashaya Vishnu? He is the one who expands into the Paramatma of every living entity. And where does the Paramatma enter? He enters into everything that exists, moving and non. So these two statements are confirmed. That is Andha Antarasta, which means he enters the Anda as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu. Paramanu Chayantarastam, which means he also, not only that he enters into the Brahmandas and just he's sitting there as the main controller of it, but he also goes into every individual living entity, including the Parama Anu. So to that extent, the Lord expands. And how does that happen? So he says that in this verse from the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada quotes, Ekam sena sthito jagat. Just that one angsa he expanded, and then from there multiple angsas came, and then he maintains everything. That is the beauty of it. But without the Lord being there in any of these entities, none of them can be functional. So the function is made possible only by the presence of the Lord. If the Lord is not present, there is nothing that is functional, operational. That is the ultimate understanding. And that is what is explained in this verse by saying that the supreme powerful Lord simultaneously entered into the 23 elements with the goddess Kali, his external energy, who alone amalgamates all the different elements, which means he is the one who brings together all these elements to make them function. That's the point. Text number 3. So anupravishto bhagavans cheshta rupena thang ghanam bhinnam samyojayam asa suktam karma prabodhayan. Yes, Mataji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna. Saha, that Anupravishtaha, thus entering later on, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Cheshta Rupena, by his representation of attempt Kali, Tam, them, Ganam, all the living entities, including the demigods, Bhinnam, separately, Samyojayam, are engaged to work, Suptam, sleeping, Prabodhyan, enlightening. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thus, when the personality of God had entered into the elements by his energy, all the living entities were enlivened into different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep. So, everything that is created in the material world, the components of that is already available. Where is it available? As part of Mahatattva. Where is that Mahatattva? It is part of Mahavishnu. It is there. Just like how when you enter the kitchen, everything is sitting there inside the refrigerator. I mean, in today's context, those days it was not there. But in today's context, everything should be there in the kitchen, in the cupboards and everything. But somebody has to put them all together to have the various things come out. In a similar way, when the personality of God had entered into these elements by his energy, all the living entities were enlivened into different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep. Every individual soul remains unconscious after the dissolution of the creation and thus enters into the Lord with his material energy. These individual living entities are conditioned souls everlastingly, but in each and every material creation, they are given a chance to liberate themselves and become free souls. They are all given a chance to take advantage of the Vedic wisdom and find out what is their relationship with the Supreme Lord, how they can be liberated, and what the ultimate profit is in such liberation. By properly studying the Vedas, one becomes conscious of his position and thus takes to the transcendental devotional service of the Lord and is gradually promoted to the spiritual sky. So we have two types of jivas, the Nitya Siddhas and the Nitya Baddhas. Who are Nitya Siddhas? Are the ones who are eternally part of the Lord's activities in the spiritual planets, in the spiritual world. They are eternally there. They were created there, they were there, they are always present there. But the jivas who are part of this material world were given two options. One option was at the time of creation, do you want to take to Krishna or do you want to take to material world? The one who unanimously selected to take to Krishna immediately were sent to the spiritual world. But the one who hesitated whether they want to take up to Krishna or not, or rather who had the idea of wanting to enjoy themselves separately from Krishna, they were given the existence in this material world. Okay, and those living entities are the ones that is being called here as these individual living entities or conditioned souls everlastingly. But in each and every material creation, they are given a chance. For what? For them to liberate themselves and become free souls going back home, back to God. They are all given a chance to take advantage of the Vedic system. So in the Vedas, why it is talking about Vedic system now? The purpose of the Vedic system is to give everybody a chance to get out of this state. That is why the Vedas begin by saying Atato Brahma Jignasha, that one has to inquire into Brahman and get out of this state. Right? By properly studying the Vedas, one becomes conscious of his position and thus takes to the transcendental devotional service of the Lord and is gradually promoted to the spiritual sky. The individual souls in the material world engage in different activities according to their past unfinished desires. After the dissolution of a particular body, the individual soul forgets everything, but the all-merciful Lord, who is situated in everyone's heart as the witness, the super soul, awakens him and reminds him of his past desires, and thus he begins to act accordingly in his next life. This unseen guidance is described as fate, and a sensible man can understand that this continues his material bondage in the three modes of nature. So there is a living entity. He is sent into the material world. He has desires and he performs activities. The activities produce results. Not only results, they also produce further more activities. Because in the process of performing activities and getting results, there are certain bondages that we get. To fulfill those bondages, we have to perform more activities. So we perform those activities, again we get results, again we get more bondages. And then we enter into more activity. Like that, there is an endless loop of activities that are going on. That is the nature of this material world. That is, we started with only one activity that we want to enjoy and satisfy our senses. And then somebody came to help. And then we're thinking, oh, I wanted to enjoy. I perform this activity, but I can't perform this activity independently. So I need help. I got the help and I got the result. Now it's not over there. Why? Because somebody helped you. If you don't go back and help them or do an activity for them, then it becomes very selfish. So what do? You have to go and do something. Like, for example, we go to a marriage, we give a gift. And then, we are thinking, oh, last time when they came to our marriage, what did they give? We need to give them something reasonably equal to that. Otherwise, they will feel, that we start thinking. So like this, endlessly, it is going on. This marriage after that marriage after son's marriage, after grandson's marriage, like that is going on endlessly. Right? This is the very nature of activity, that we see that there are some people involved in the activity. And then we have to fulfill the bondage of seeking their help. And accordingly, we create endless loops of activities and results and so on and so forth. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, while performing the activity, the purpose of performing the activity is only for enjoyment. But unfortunately, enjoyment is not the only result that comes out of the activity. There is also distress that comes out of the activity. Sometimes there is an increased amount of happiness, there is an increased amount of distress. It keeps alternating. That is the nature of this material world. And now, after many, many millions of lifetimes, we don't have a count of how many millions of activities that we have performed, how much help that we have got, and for which how much we have to perform more activities to fulfill and complete this entire loop of what we have done. Forget about millions of lifetimes. Even in this very lifetime, we don't know what all we did, who or all we are indebted to. Yes or no? Right? We don't know. We are constantly doing something. We are thinking we are indebted to this, we are indebted to that. And we are doing activities after activities, and then results and so on and so forth. But Krishna says, if that same activity is done simply as a satisfaction for Vishnu, yajñātāt karmano anyatra lokoyam, that when the same activity is performed as an activity to please Vishnu or Krishna, then the intermediary linkages that we get, which create more activity, are destroyed. Is everyone following? Right? That is what is happening. So this is what technically is happening, that when we perform it for the pleasure of Krishna, then we do not become bound to anybody in between in the process. That is why, even though Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the beginning portions of the Bhagavad Gita, that one has to worship the devatas and thank them for everything that they're enjoying from them. That's what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita about Devata worship. And then later in the Bhagavad Gita, he himself says, fools only worship the Devatas. So are these two contradictory statements? No, they are not. They are only statements for different levels of progress that we have to understand. At a certain level where people have just begun to live so-called basic human life, yes, you have to start worshipping the Devatas and thank them. But if you have progressed to a level where you have understood I am part and parcel of Krishna, and Krishna is the ultimate, and he is the source of all causes, and he is the root. And if I satisfy the root, everybody else is automatically satisfied. Then what happens? We can give this process up and take up that one process of trying to water the root or worship Krishna alone. Because worshipping Krishna will automatically satisfy everyone else in the entire creation. That is the understanding. Right? And for that understanding to happen, Isopanishad says that one has to have a clear understanding of both. Vidya means, in that reference, it says Vidya means the subject matter about Krishna, and Avidya also means something that does not directly refer to Krishna, but both of them should be known, it says. Both the sides of the matter, which means both material and spiritual knowledge should be side by side known. And so here in this chapter, we see that there is a description about how these material elements are created and how the Lord has a hand in everything, or how he is directly expanding and giving energy to each one of these entities. Now we understand, in the previous chapter, we saw the Devatas are saying, please tell us what we should do. You have created us, which means he is the one who is giving it. Now the Devatas are going to act through the elements. Now the elements, they are also not independent. They are also Krishna is coming. And then there is the, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, we can understand that everything is Krishna. Sarvam Krishna Mayam, right? Everything is Krishna Mayam. Without Krishna, there is nothing that can be existent. That is the understanding. For us to get that understanding, these topics are discussed in the Srimad Bhagavatam to get a clear understanding. Whereas the so-called Sankhya philosophers simply understand these 23 elements and they think, these 23 elements come together and then the entire cosmic manifestation is functioning, blah, blah, all of that stuff. And then they start to manipulate these 23 elements to understand the creation. And then they negate the Supreme Lord. But they don't understand that all these 23 elements are there just like how they are just sitting in the kitchen. Unless the cook enters the kitchen, nothing happens. In a similar way, until the Supreme Lord enters, nothing happens. Everything are in a suspended animation stage. Right? So that is the whole description. So this unseen guidance is described as fate. And a sensible man can understand that this continues his material bondage in the three modes of nature. As long as he does not understand what this guidance is, he continues in the three modes. When he understands, then he has transcended the three modes. All of this is happening under the guidance of Krishna. So the unconscious sleeping stage of the living entity just after the partial or total dissolution of the creation is wrongly accepted as the final stage of life by some less intelligent philosophers. After the dissolution of the partial material body, the living entity remains unconscious for only a few months, and after the total dissolution of the material creation, he remains unconscious for many millions of years. But when the creation is again revived, he is awakened to his work by the Lord. Now, when he is awakened, so let me just explain first. So what happens? Now one lifetime has passed. We have created a lot of activities and results, and then some vasanas, the impressions that we have created, and they are all sitting there in our head. Then the annihilation of the material world happens. Then what happens? All the jivas go back and enter into Mahavishnu. Right? So at that time, what enters Mahavishnu's body? Not only the jiva, the soul, but the subtle body, the Sukshma Sarira also goes. What is there in the Sukshma Sarira? Man, Buddhi and Ahankar. And what is the Man, Buddhi and Ahankar carrying? It is carrying the impressions from the past life. And it is sitting there in an animated stage in a suspended animation stage within the body of Mahavishnu. For how many years? Millions and millions of years. Why? Because that is the time for which he is resting. Right? So when again the creation happens and the jiva comes out to get a body, how does he get a body? What kind of body is allocated to him? A body that is suitable according to the desires he is carrying within his head. Or when I say head, the subtle body, whatever is the desires that it is carrying from those millions and millions of lives of past impressions, accordingly a body is allocated to that living entity. Now the body is allocated, but the jiva still does not know what were the desires because he does not remember what is there in the previous lives. Only Krishna remembers that. And what is Krishna doing? He enters into the jiva as Paramatma. Sarvasya chaham hriddhi sannivishto. And then what he does? Mata smritir jnanam apohanam cha. So he makes you remember those past desires so that you can perform activity. Right? Not only that he makes you remember, he also gives you forgetfulness. He only gives you the desires that you brought from your previous life, but he does not give you the actual experience. Because if you get, you will become a mad person. If you get all the thoughts of from the previous life, you will become. So he knows what to give and what not to give. Why does he give remembrance of those impressions alone? Because when you perform those activities, at some point in time, you will get frustrated. He knows that. Because this material world cannot give you real happiness. At that point, he gives smritihi, real intellect, dadami buddhiyoham tam, he says. When he is just waiting for that point of frustration that you're going to get into. After so-called enjoyment of everything, you finally come, oh, I have tried enough. It doesn't work, my dear Lord. Now I come to you. Just like Arjuna, he tried enough. Finally, he said, Sishyasteham Shadimam Tvam. So Krishna is only waiting for that stage when we will come to that stage of Prapannam. So, but when the creation is again revived, he is awakened to his work by the Lord. So that is what is described here. So the living entity is eternal, and the wakeful state of his consciousness manifested by activities in his natural condition of life. He cannot stop acting while awake, and thus he acts according to his diverse desires. When his desires are trained in the transcendental service of the Lord, his life becomes perfect, and he is promoted to the spiritual sky to enjoy eternal awakened life. When his desires are trained in the transcendental service of the Lord. Now the question is, how can one train the desires in the transcendental service of the Lord? That process of becoming trained in the transcendental service of the Lord is the process of hearing, which we heard in the previous. That is by constant hearing about how other devotees trained themselves in the transcendental service of the Lord, we get pleasure. And seeing that we also want to get that pleasure. And that is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. That when you experience a higher taste, when you hear that those devotees, when they associated with the Lord, experience a pleasure which is higher than what you have experienced ever in your material condition, then you also want to experience that taste. And that is called param drishtva nivartate. That you will want to get into spiritual life and you will not want to come into the material. That is the point. Text number 4. Prabuddha karma dhaivena trayo vimshatiko ganaha prerito ajanayat swavir matravir adipurusham.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu.
Prabuddha awakened karma activity daivena by the will of the Supreme. Traya Sakita by 23 principal ingredients. Ganaha, the combination. Pritaha, induced by Ajaniyat, manifested. Swabihi, by his personal. Matrabihi, plenary expansion. Adi Purusham, the universal form, Vishwa.
Hare Krishna. When the 23 principal elements were set in action by the will of the Supreme, the gigantic universal form or the Vishwarupa body of the Lord came into existence. The Virat Rupa or Vishwarupa, the gigantic universal form of the Lord, which is very much appreciated by the impersonalists, is not an eternal form of the Lord. It is manifested by the supreme will of the Lord after the ingredients of material creation. Lord Krishna exhibited this Virat or Vishwarupa to Arjuna just to convince the impersonalists that he is the original personality of Godhead. Krishna exhibited the Virat Rupa. It is not that Krishna was exhibited by the Virat Rupa. The Virat Rupa is not, therefore, an eternal form of the Lord exhibited in the spiritual sky. It is a material manifestation of the Lord. The Archa Vigraha of the worshipable deity in the temple is a similar manifestation of the Lord for the neophytes. But in spite of their material touch, such forms of the Lord as the Virat and Archa are all non-different from his eternal form as Lord Krishna. Now, the explanation is about as to who the Vishwarupa or the Virat Rupa of the Lord is. Once the 23 principal elements were set into action, then the whole, essentially, as you see, the 23 elements means the Panchamahabhut, Karma Indriyas, Jnana Indriyas, Tanmatras, and then Man Buddhi Ahankar, and then the Kala. Everything comes into action. Now, that is the whole system. It's like a one unit. And what is that one unit of the entire cosmic man? That one unit is the universal form of the Lord. That is the Vishwarupa or the Virat Rupa. And then Srila Prabhupada explains about the nature of this Virat Rupa. So, the Virat Rupa is formed at a certain point in time in the material manifestation after the creation of the 23 principal elements which are set into action by the potency of the Supreme Lord, which means it has a point of existence. It is a point of... So, this Virat Rupa, the Vishwarupa form, is not an eternal form as compared to the eternal forms of the Lord in the... So, that is point number one. Who are attracted to this Virat Rupa? He says, who are the, where is it? Impersonalists. He says, just to convince the impersonalists. So the impersonalists, they don't want to believe in the form of the Lord, but they believe in the Virat Rupa form. Why? Because they think that, oh, just like we came to this material world, the Virat Rupa also came into this material world in a form. After this material world is finished, he will also be finished. So they have that conception of the Virat Rupa. Right? But then Krishna, when he showed his Virat Rupa in the battlefield of Kurukshetra to Arjuna, he showed that the Virat Rupa came from Krishna. It's not that the Virat Rupa, Krishna came from Virat Rupa. So that point he is clarifying, which means that the original form is Krishna. And where is that original form? That original form is there in the spiritual world. Krishna Su Bhagavan Su. Right? So that is clarified there. Then Srila Prabhupada also explains the Archa Vigraha form is also material because it is made of matter, because it is made of, let's say, Panchaloka or Dharu Brahma, or it can be made of some kind of another material. It could be paint, it could be sand, it could be, clay. In any of these forms, you can make the deity form of the Lord. Right? So you can say that is also temporary. So why are we worshipping that? He says, no, even though it is temporary, it is not different from the original personality of Godhead because the Lord has entered into it. Right? Because the Lord has entered into it, it is not, even though if it is temporary, it is not that it does not have the potency of the Lord. So that Srila Prabhupada clarifies here. Text number 5. Parena Vishata Swasmin Matraya Vishwasruganaha Shukso Bhanyonyam Asadhya Yasmin Lokas Characharaha.
Krishna Prabhu, shall I read?
Yes, ma'am.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Parena, by the Lord, Vishata, thus entering, Swasmin, by his own self, Matraya, by the planet Vishwasruk, the elements of the universal creation, Ganaha, all, Chukshobha, transform, Anyonyam, one another, Ashadaya, having obtained, Yasmin, in which, Lokaha, the planets, Chara, movable and immovable. Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you.
Hare Krishna. As the Lord, in his plenary portion, entered into the elements of the universal creation, they transformed into the gigantic form in which all the planetary systems and all movable and immovable creations rest. The elements of cosmic creation are all matter and have no potency to increase in volume unless entered into by the Lord in his plenary portion. This means that matter does not increase or decrease unless it is spiritually touched. Matter is a product of spirit and increases only by the touch of spirit. The entire cosmic manifestation has not assumed its gigantic form by itself. Now, the reason Prabhupada is explaining this is many people think that by the so-called process of Big Bang, everything happens automatically. That one thing collides over another and then a planet is created and so on and so forth. It is absolute nonsense, right? Why? Because without the touch of spirit, matter cannot expand by itself, right? The touch of spirit is required for matter to expand. And that original spirit from whom everything expands is the Supreme Personality of God. So, matter is a product of spirit and increases only by the touch of spirit. The entire cosmic manifestation has not assumed its gigantic form by itself, as wrongly calculated by less intelligent persons. As long as spirit is within matter, matter can increase as needed. But without the spirit, matter stops increasing. Simple thing that when a person dies and the spirit has gone from the living body, does the body expand? No, it stops. Right at that moment, it stops to expand. It cannot live. It starts to mutilate. So when are you going to lift the body? Nobody is going to say anything else. When are you going to lift? Because it's already stinking there. Because it starts to mutilate, right? So spirit is the one which makes that entity an entity. Otherwise, it's got no value. For example, as long as there is spiritual consciousness within the material body of a living entity, the body increases to the required size, but a dead material body, which has no spiritual consciousness, stops increasing. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, importance is given to the spiritual consciousness, not the body. The entire cosmic body increased by the same process that we experience in our small bodies. One should not, however, foolishly think that the individual infinitesimal soul is the cause of the gigantic manifestation of the universal form. The universal form is called the Virat Rupa because the Supreme Lord is within it in his plenary portion. What is the point? We are infinitesimal. We are Anu. But he is Vibhu. And so he is Virat Rupa. How can an Anu become the Virat Rupa? It's not possible. So he is, Srila Prabhupada is differentiating the position of the Mayavadis who think that the Virat Rupa, that the living entity, the Anu living entity at some point in time can become the Virat Rupa or become the Lord or become Narayan. So he is defeating that point. Text number 6. Hiranmayaha sa purushaha sahasra parivatsaran anda kosha uvashapsu sarva satvo upabramhitaha. Yes,
Hiranmaya, the Garbhodakshai Vishnu, who also assumes the Virat Rupa, Saha, he, Purusaha, incarnation of Godhead, Sahasra, 1000, Parivatsaran, celestial year, and Kose, within the globe universe, Uvasa, resided, Apasu, on the water, Sarva Sattva, all living entity lying with him, Upabrihimitaha, so spread. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. The gigantic Virat Purusha known as Hiranmaya lived for 1000 celestial years on the water of the universe, and all the living entities lay with him. After the Lord entered each and every universe as the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, half of the universe was filled with water. The cosmic manifestation of the planetary systems, outer space, etc., which are visible to us, is only one half of the complete universe. Before the manifestation takes place and after the entrance of Vishnu within the universe, there is a period of 1000 celestial years. All the living entities injected within the womb of the Mahatattva are divided in all universes with the incarnation of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, and all of them lie down with the Lord until Brahma is born. Brahma is the first living being within the universe, and from him all other demigods and living creatures are born. Manu is the original father of mankind, and therefore in Sanskrit, mankind is called Manusya. Humanity in different bodily qualities is distributed throughout the various planetary systems. So, as to how further it expands, that when Garbhodakashayi Vishnu is there, then half of it is filled with the water, the Garbha, and then there is the Lord, and then from his Nabi is created the Lord Brahma, and then Brahma is meditating for 1000 years. And during that time, these living entities are still in a suspended stage. And then the Manus are created, and the Prajapatis are created, and then the living entities start to get their body and start to function. Until then, they are still in their suspended animation stage. Text number 7. Savai Vishwasrajam Garbo Deva Karmatma Shaktiman Viba Bhajatmanatmanam Atmanam Ekadha Dasada Trida.
Pranay Prabhuji.
Go ahead, Mataji.
Saha, that by certainly Vishwasrijam of the gigantic Virat from Garbha, total energy, Deva, living energy, Karma, activity of life, Atma, self, Shaktiman, full with potencies, Vibha Bhaja, divided, Atmana, by himself, Atmanam, himself, Ekadha, in oneness, Dashadha in 10, Tridha and in 3. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. The total energy of the Mahatattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself by himself into the consciousness of the living entities, the life of activity, the self-identification, which are subdivided into 1, 10, and 3 respectively. Consciousness is the sign of the living entity or the soul. The existence of the soul is manifest in the form of consciousness called Jnana Shakti. The total consciousness is that of the gigantic Virat Rupa, and the same consciousness is exhibited in individual persons. The activity of consciousness is performed through the air of life, which is of 10 divisions. The airs of lives are called Prana, Apana, Udhana, Vyana, and Samana, and are also differently qualified as Naga, Kurma, Krikara, Devadatta, and Dhananjaya. The consciousness of the soul becomes polluted by the material atmosphere, and thus various activities are exhibited in the false ego of bodily identification. These various activities are described in the Bhagavad Gita as Bahu Shakahi Anantascha Buddhayo Avyavasayana. The conditioned soul is bewildered into various activities for want of pure consciousness. In pure consciousness, the activity is one. The consciousness of the individual soul becomes one with the supreme consciousness when there is complete synthesis between the two. The monist believes that there is only one consciousness, whereas the sattvatas or the devotees believe that although there is undoubtedly one consciousness, they are one because there is agreement. The individual consciousness is advised to dovetail with the supreme consciousness as instructed by the Lord in the Bhagavad Gita. Sarvadharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam vraja. The individual consciousness, Arjuna, is advised to dovetail with the supreme consciousness and thus maintain his conscious purity. It is foolish to try to adopt the activities of consciousness, but they can be purified when they are dovetailed with the Supreme. This consciousness is divided into 3 modes of self-identification according to the proportion of purity: Adhyatmika, or self-identification with the body; Adi Bhautika, the mind, and self-identification with the material products; and Adi Dhaivika, self-identification as a servant of the Lord. Of the 3, Adi Dhaivika self-identification is the beginning of purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desire of the Lord. So we see that here there is the explanation. The total energy of the Mahatattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself by himself into the consciousness of the living entities. That is, first he divided himself into the conscious. That is, he is the original consciousness. Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetananam. Eko Bahunam Yo Vidadhati Kama. He is the original consciousness, and that original consciousness expanded into the individual consciousness of the various living entities. Right? So that is one. And then it talks about here, which are subdivided into 1, 10, and 3 respectively. So the 1 is that consciousness which expanded into every living entity. And then into 10 in terms of the living air force. That is, consciousness is the one that pervades the body. You know, if somebody is met with an accident or something, they say, is the person conscious? The body is there. The mind is there. In fact, probably the heart is also beating. But is a person conscious? Right? Which means is he able to see himself or experience himself? So that is consciousness. So consciousness is beyond all of this. Which means what? The life is there, but it can be subconscious or unconscious also. So the life is different from consciousness. That we can first variegate. So we have to understand that that consciousness is that expansion of the original consciousness of the Supreme Lord. That is one. And then there is the life, which is called prana chalgaya, means the prana is gone. What is that prana? That prana expands into 10 forms, which is the prana, apana, udhana, vyana, and samana. And also there are the sub of these 5 elements, which is the naga, kurma, krikara, devadatta, and dhanurya. So those are the 10 items through which he expands. And then he talks about the further, the identification in terms of how one identifies himself. Whether he identifies with the body, which is explained here as Atmika, or Adi Bhautika, which means with the material products, or does he identify himself with the Supreme Lord, which means the desire of the Lord, which is Adi Daivika. Of course, there are various other explanations of Adi Daivika at different levels of consciousness. So let us, for now, not confuse them with the other levels of consciousness. Because when we talk about these 3 items of Adi Bhautika, Adi Daivika, and Adi Atmika, we also talk about the kleshas that come out of it. So we should not confuse that with this. They are at different levels. They work at different levels, right? So Adhyatmika here means that basically identifying oneself with the body or the material products, which is Adi Bhautika. Adi Daivika means identifying with the Lord. What does it mean by identifying with the Lord? That he says here. What does he say? That when one identifies himself with the Lord, he does not become God, but he acts in a consciousness that is same as the desire of the Lord. Which means, we'll take the example of Arjuna. Arjuna was in the bodily concept of life, which means Adi Atmika. What is the concept? He was thinking he is going to fight with his relatives and so on and so forth. And then he was thinking, if I kill, these things will happen, which means you can say Adi Bhautika. But then he did not come to the stage of Adi Dhaivika, which means here is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What is his desire? He did not think about it. Right? And then when he surrendered to Krishna, then Krishna said what his desire is. Now you align your activity according to what I want, because I am the one who dictates dharma. So he says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam. Right? So our responsibility is to align our consciousness at the same level of what the desire of the Supreme Lord is, rather than having to have our own independent desire independent of the Supreme Lord. And that desire is called as Yajna Arthat Karmano Anyat. Understood? Right? So simply satisfying Krishna according to his own what is that verse? That Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. Atah Pumbir Dvijasreshta Varnashrama Vibhagasaha Swanustitasya Dharmasya Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. If the Anushtan of the Dharma is not as per Haritoshanam, the pleasure of the Lord, then it is not Suanushtita. It is not being properly performed. That is the point that is being made here. Text number 8. Esha hi asesha sattvanam atmangshah paramatmanah adhyo avataro yatrasho bhutagramo vibhavyate.
Prabhu,
Yes, Mataji.
Yeshaha, this, he certainly, Asesha, unlimited, Satvanam, living entities, Atma, self, Amshaha, part, Parama Atmanaha, of the super soul, Adyaha, the first, Avataraha, incarnation, Yatra, whereupon, Asav, all those, Bhutagramaha, the aggregate creations, Vibhavyati, flourish. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Guru.
Hare Krishna. The gigantic universal form of the Supreme Lord is the first incarnation and plenary portion of the Super Soul. He is the self of an unlimited number of living entities, and in him rests the aggregate creation, which thus flourishes. The Supreme Lord expands himself in two ways, by personal plenary expansions and separated minute expansions. The personal plenary expansions are the Vishnu Tattvas, and the separated expansions are the living entities. Since the living entities are very small, they are sometimes described as the marginal energy of the Lord. But the mystic yogis consider the living entities and the super soul Paramatma to be one and the same. It is, however, a minor point of controversy. After all, everything created rests on the gigantic Virat, or the universal form of the Lord. Ultimately, the soul living entity is also as good as the super soul, but it is only different in terms of its quantity, that it is Anu and the Lord is Vibhu. Right? Now, the question of Anu and Vibhu is a separate topic. That is a point of controversy that Srila Prabhupada mentions it, which has been discussed several times before. But ultimately, in terms of its nature, it is the same nature. And Srila Prabhupada also differentiates by saying there are two types of such expansions. One is the expansions where they are minute expansions and they are separated from the Lord, and they are called as the Jivas. But there are also the personal plenary expansions, who are the Vishnu Tattvas, which are the Garbhodakshaya Vishnus and the Karnodakshaya Vishnus and the Shirodakshaya Vishnus and so on. Sadhyatmaha sadidhaivascha sadibhuta iti tridha virat prano dashavidha ekada hridayena cha.
Can I, Prabhu? Hare
Yes,
Krishna. Sa Adi Atmaha, the body and mind with all the senses. Sa Adi Devaha, and the controlling demigods of the senses. Cha and Sa Adi Bhuta, the present objectives. Iti, thus. Tridha, three. Virat, gigantic. Dasa Vidaha, 10 kinds. Ekha, one only. Hridayana, living energy. Cha also. Hare Krishna.
The gigantic universal form is represented by 3, 10, and 1 in the sense that he is the body and the mind and the senses. He is the dynamic force for all movements by 10 kinds of life energy, and he is the one heart where life energy is generated. In Bhagavad Gita 7.4.5, it is stated that the 8 elements, earth, water, fire, air, sky, mind, intelligence, and false ego, are all products of the Lord's inferior energy. Binna Prakriti Rastada, separated energies of the Lord. Whereas the living entities, even though they are also Prakriti, they are also kind of Binna Prakriti, but they are Para Prakriti, he says. Apareyam itastwanyam prakritim viddime param jiva bhutam e mahabaho Arjuna. That is the statement. So, there are 8 inferior energies work grossly and subtly, whereas the superior energy works as the central generating force. This is experienced in the human body. The gross elements, namely earth, etc., form the external gross body, or like a coat, whereas the subtle mind and false ego act like the inner clothing of the body. The movements of the body are first generated from the heart, and all the activities of the body are made possible by the senses, powered by the 10 kinds of air within the body. The 10 kinds of air are described as follows. The main air passing through the nose is breathing is called prana. The air which passes through the rectum as evacuated bodily air is called apana. The air which adjusts the foodstuff within the stomach and which sometimes sounds as belching is called as samana. The air which passes through the throat and the stoppage of which constitutes suffocation is called udhana air. And the total air which circulates throughout the entire body is called the vyana. Subtler than these five airs, there are also other. And that which facilitates the opening of the eyes, mouth, etc. is called naga. And the air which increases appetite is called krikara. The air which helps contraction is called kurma. And the air which helps relaxation by opening the mouth wide in yawning is called devadatta air. And the air which helps sustenance is called dhananjaya air. All these airs are generated from the center of the heart, which is one only. This central energy is superior energy of the Lord, and who is seated within the heart with the soul of the body, and who acts under the guidance of the Lord. And this is explained in the Bhagavad Gita as follows: Sarvasya chaham hriddhi sannivisto matasmritir jnanam apohanam cha. Vedaischa sarvairahameva vedhyo vedantakrit vedavit eva chaham. The complete central force is generated from the heart by the Lord, who is seated there and who helps the conditioned soul in remembering and forgetting. The conditioned state is due to the soul's forgetfulness of his relationship of subordination to the Lord. One who wants to continue to forget the Lord is helped by the Lord to forget him birth after birth. But one who remembers him by dint of association with the devotee of the Lord is helped to remember him more and more. Thus, the conditioned soul can ultimately go back home, back to God. So the Lord is ready to help more, either in forgetfulness or in remembrance. But it is a choice that we want to make. If we choose to remember him, he will help to remember more and more. If we choose to forget him, he will help us to forget more and more. This process of transcendental help by the Lord is described in the Bhagavad Gita 10:10 as follows: Tetham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadhami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. The Buddhi Yoga process of self-realization with intelligence transcendental to the mind devotional service can alone elevate one from the conditioned state of material entanglement in the cosmic construction. Right? Only when we are ready to take up to that process of self-realization, that we are not this body, through the process of Buddhi Yoga or devotional service. The conditioned state of the living entity is like that of a person who is within the depths of a huge mechanical arrangement. The mental speculators can reach the point of Buddhi Yoga after many, many lifetimes of speculation. But the intelligent person who begins from the platform of intelligence above the mind makes rapid progress in self-realization, because the Buddhi Yoga process entails no fear of deterioration or retrogression at any time. It is the guaranteed path of self-realization as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 240. The mental speculators cannot understand that the two birds, Svetasara Upanishad, sitting in one tree are the soul and the super soul. The individual soul eats the fruit of the tree while the other bird does not eat the fruit but only observes the activities of the eating bird. Without attachment, the witnessing bird helps the fruit-eating bird perform fruitful activities. One who cannot understand this difference between the soul and the super soul, or God and the living entities, is certainly in the entanglement of the cosmic machinery, and thus must still await the time when he will be free from bondage. Right? It's quite self-explanatory. So I would recommend that if you could read, if you want to know more about the different airs that are the 10 different types of air that is there in the paragraph, you can read that for our own understanding and becoming a little bit more knowledgeable on that. But fundamentally, it is the Supreme Lord, by his presence within our body, who makes everything function in terms of even these expansion of these 10 air elements within the body. And he gives us a choice of wanting to forget us or remember. If we want to remember, he helps that process more. If we want to forget, then he helps that process more. He is given that free will to us. It is up to us to make that choice. And for the one who chooses to remember him, he gives them the Dhami Buddhi Yogam Tam. And if one treads that path by taking his advice of Buddhi Yoga, then one can advance very fast in the process of devotional service. That is the conclusion. So I'll stop here. Hari Om Tat Sat. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Samaveda Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Bhavana Mangal Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.